first get into writing? What was your big thing that got you into writing?
I always enjoyed reading and writing. So from a very young age, enjoyed not just reading but also creating my own stories or own playing with language. So it just kind of grew out of that. So through school, getting involved with the school newspaper, and then going to college, and being involved with the literary magazine. I think I was a creative writing minor, so I took some courses there, and so people would share stories and read a bunch of stories, poems, go see plays, anything. Enjoyed films, comic books, anything. And then countered zines. Then it was Bowling Green in Ohio, and
Mm-hmm.
there was a pretty cool little rock scene in the late '80s. And one of the fans, or one of the maybe the bands, it was a little mysterious, created
Mm-hmm.
this fanzine about the scene, and that was pretty fun seeing that. I suppose I'd probably run into a zine or two before that, but this was the first one that really, I think it was called the Bubba. So that was
The
interesting.
Bubba.
Make your own magazine. Yeah, the Bubba. And they
Oh,
would
that's
interview local bands or make fun of the bands they didn't like, or whatever. So that was fun. And then I didn't do a zine, but then after college, I went back to my hometown. I was working as a overnight DJ at the radio station. And it was just me, and it was kind of boring. So I just did a zine, just a fun zine called Smash. It was just a one-page broadsheet, and the radio station was kind enough to donate their support, which I was the only one at the radio station, so it was real easy to get their support there. And we did that, and that was fun. It was like a little scene there in Youngstown and Newcastle, Pennsylvania, Youngstown, Ohio, and we just published silly stories and maybe interview the occasional band or something. So I did that, and then I went to grad school, and I was curious, like, why did I want to do a zine? Like what motivated me. And I had this professor who was real into psychoanalysis, and he liked Freud and Lacan, and he liked exploring why people did things, even things that were perverse or didn't make sense in an economic, rational sense. And so zines was perfect. So I started researching it and interviewing zine publishers and seeing why they did it, if it was similar to me, and did a thesis about it. And that
oh,
sort of led me into doing the whole zine scene, because I was corresponding with zine publishers on a pretty regular basis to do that project. And then I shared the results. I put together the thesis as a zine. I think I had a sticker
nice.
my mom had bought me. This document will self-destruct in 60 seconds. And it was just a silly sticker from like a spy sticker set or something for kids. And people thought that was the title, and they were reviewing it, that document. I still occasionally get an email showing up asking for copies of that.
Really?
Studying zines. Yeah, I'm kind of glad it slowed down, because almost every time I'll be like, oh, okay, sure. Here you go, because I don't print it out anymore, but I'll send them like an e-version of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I look forward to seeing your research. And I don't think anyone has ever sent me their research. So either they never finish or they just forget. I just thought that was kind of crappy, honestly, because like I sent it off to whoever I interviewed or helped me. And that was how I got into the zine scene, because Doug Holland at Zine World, he had requested it at some point. I don't know if
Okay.
I interviewed him or he just requested it. Because once it went out, they started reviewing it in zines and treating it like a zine. So I would get people writing for a copy of it, and so I trade with them, or sometimes they'd send like $2 or $3, whatever the price was back then for a zine. And he somehow got a hold of it and wanted me to review for Zine World, which was a review zine. Fact Sheet 5 was still around, but was kind of dying at that point. And
This is like the late '90s by this point.
yeah, late '90s, definitely. So this would be like 95, 96, and it wasn't coming out fast enough. And so Doug and some others had formed this Zine World, and they were going to review zines more often than Fact Sheet 5, which was coming out maybe once a year at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And it eventually just went defunct, and there's always been rumors it's coming back, and nothing ever really happens. But Zine World carried on for probably 10, 15 years. Now Xerography Debt seems to have kind of taken the cornered the market. I don't know, there are many zine review zines out there, but Zine World was running, and I reviewed for them for a few years, just reading zines. And then I wanted to do another zine of my own, so I did one called Drink, Drank, Drunk, which was mainly just fiction writing. And then I had some friends that wrote stories or did a comic strip, and so that was fun. It gave me something to trade with people beyond the thesis, which was just a one shot. And I did that. I did 3 issues of that, and then number 4 we just did online because the internet was getting more common, and the university, I was in grad school, the university gave us web access, so we could have like a little website. So I did the 4th one as kind of like an e-zine. Then I did a dissertation exploring, like, because people were making all these claims about how electronic publishing was going to affect reading and writing in society, and it seemed like zine publishers were, of course, sort of at the forefront of that, and it was very pure because most of them weren't in it for the money, so they were just kind of exploring it for the publishing part. And I did a dissertation about how they were doing that, and that led me to get involved with the ULA, and I believe that's the first time I encountered Carl Wencless. And some of the ULA folks was basically they were putting together the ULA. They had been doing zines before, and I definitely interviewed Carl, if I remember correctly. I might have interviewed a couple of them about zines and electronic publishing. Carl, ironically, hated electronic publishing at that time. He was a total thought it was horrible, and it's ironic. Then he would have this like network of zines, or e-zines and blogs afterwards. But at that time, he wanted nothing to do with it. So he would say funny stuff. He's very committed to the zine world, and just kind of got involved with the ULA. Got invited to perform at their Amato Opera House show and do some other things, and kept up with the ULA. We did the blog together, you and I, so that got me kind of introduced to underground publishing. I didn't really do a zine till a couple years later. I did the Pornographic Flabbergasted Moose. So as I had read about this zine, I think Thomas Trusky, who was at Boise State University, if I remember correctly, was an English professor, and he did like this exhibit of zines, and he published a book about it. And it was a very nice kind of coffee table book, and I used it in my research and corresponded with him. He was a nice guy. He's deceased now, but he had this, and one of them was this novel called The Snopes Go Camping, which must have been based on like William Faulkner's characters, but really was just like a kind of like a poor family and kind of poking fun, or just having being silly. But it was this novel that was a serialized novel. I've never found anything about it. I never found a copy of it aside from this one mention, but I was like, oh, that's a cool idea. I remember Dickens and them, Mark Twain, Edgar Allan Poe, they used to serialize novels. We can still do it today through a zine. That'd be cool. So I did the Pornographic Flabbergasted Moose as a 7-issue zine, and again, traded with people and corresponded with people. And that was when I was in the ULA. And then after that, it was fun, but the serialized novel was a little bit of an odd medium, because if somebody missed an issue, it was hard. So I experimented with the blog, the next novel blog, Love Omega Glia, and serialized that on a blog. And after that, I kind of stopped serializing things because it was better to write things in one go. But yep, that's how I kind of ended up here. Just like one step leads to another, I guess.
Yeah. So you first heard about the ULA through Carl Wencless. You were probably corresponding with him before the ULA started as like a organization per se.
Very, very little before, because I don't remember when the first meeting. I think it was in '99. Was that their first meeting, or 2000? So I would have been a correspondent just like right before or right as he was doing that. I don't remember getting invited. He might have. He used to send me these letters. He might have invited me to the Hoboken thing, but I think he was still a little distrustful of me. I was the enemy because I was in grad school, and he kind of didn't quite know how to take me. And then gradually he used to complain about my answering machine, because he'd call me up and I would have these crazy messages on the answering machine. It would be like theater messages, like, aliens have taken over this answering machine. You may leave a message, Earthling, but it may not be received. And he would just laugh and think it was silly, and have a lot of fun. So I think eventually we sort of wore him down, and he invited myself, and then Crazy Carl came with me, so we met Carl Robinson as well. And that's how we got involved. He thought, I don't think we were even officially in the ULA at the Amato Opera House. We were just invited to perform. I think we had signed his petition. He was protesting some literary corruption. It was probably Rick Moody or something at that point, getting a grant he didn't need. And so gradually he kind of warmed to us, and I think that's when they invited us in. And we did the Detroit reading the next year at Hamtramck, officially not Detroit officially, but within Detroit is this other city, Hamtramck. We did that, and then from that point got more involved with it.
So what was your experience like at the Mono show?
That was a lot of fun. It was a very rainy day, and so we were walking around the rain. That was the first time I met Steve Kostecki, and so we sort of hit it off and mainly talked with him. but they were all there. Ann Sturzinger was there. Michael Jackman was there. I think Doug Bassett, Joe Smith, all the original members were there. And there were some other people. I think Rich Mackin, Reverend Rich Mackin, ever joined, but he was on the show. And I had known him because he had come through town through Kent. I think we had traded zines, Kent, Ohio, where I was living. And so it was fun. We hung out with him, Carl and I. But I remember things like Carl and I being absolutely soaked and going to a Dunkin' Donuts near Times Square and just trying to dry out over coffee. And then I think Mackin, there was a big Virgin mega store there that sold records and books and zines even. And it was this huge store, and we went in there and killed some time. And I remember a lot of strange things happened. It was we did the show. That was a lot of fun. And I think we went to some bar, and I was used to Kent, Ohio, very cheap beer, and crazy prices in New York. And I was like, oh, all right. And then they didn't like me because I don't think I had enough money to tip. I was all right, I guess I'll get one beer. I can afford this. And so they did a lot more drinking than I did. And then I think Mike Jackman was nice enough to put us up. But he had this dog, and we were sleeping on the floor, and the dog liked to run, had the midnight crazies, and would just run around. And it ran around our heads all night. So it wasn't a very restful thing of sleep. And then probably the funniest thing that happened was we were in a hurry to get out of there. We think we had to get back to Kent for some reason, or Ohio the next day, or the day whenever we left. I think it was the next day. And Carl was doing something. He was in the bathroom or a restroom or some bathroom. And I was packing things up because we had to get out of there. We woke up late or something because it was hard sleep with the dog running over your head all night. Yeah. So I threw all this stuff that I thought was Carl's in the car. And it turned out I had stolen the first edition of the Slush Pile, #1, the entire print run. I apparently had stolen that. So we got back to Ohio, and I was like, yeah, there's your box, Carl. He's like, that's not my box. I was like, what are you talking about? Of course it's your box. It was right by your stuff. And I picked it up and loaded it in while you were, taking a 10-minute dump, and I had to go to work. And, and he's like, that's not my box. So we open it up, and we're like, oh, yeah, that's not your box. So we had to call or email, I forget what we did, Jackman. He was like, oh, I didn't even notice that was gone. But, yeah, I think he told me not to tell anybody, so I'm sorry. Apologize to him, but I'm definitely telling people now, 20 years after the fact. But it's such a funny story. And so I mailed it back to him, and it was it was ridiculous. It was like $20, probably cheap shipping now, but expensive then for me because I was kind of broke and was like, but it was my fault. I should have checked with Jackman, and so I mailed it back to them. But that was the memorable trip to New York for the Amato Opera House.
Were you ever in Slush Pile? I think you had an excerpt from.
I had a story.
Okay, right. You had a story. They never excerpted emus, though, did they?
No. Later on, they published it as part of the book line. They collected it, so that was nice. But yeah, we just did the one story for the Slush Pile. I think they were always a little. Carl's told me and Steve they really liked the story because it was this Harold Grumble Bunny story about a guy who stumbles into a convenience store that basically he's having an existential crisis, and he stumbles into like a drug front, which is based on like a real story from Newcastle, Pennsylvania, where they were doing that. And so I just threw this crazy character who's kind of clueless in there, and he's having this existential crisis, and he wanders into all this insanity happens. But I think our stuff was a little more humorous, and I think at that point, a lot of times they wanted stuff that was more hard hitting or working class or proletarian literature, and we didn't quite fit the bill. And I think ultimately they came along to us just because we were the only ones left, because a lot of the underground writers were kind of crazy, and they'd tell you they'd show up somewhere and they wouldn't, or they'd send you something and they wouldn't. But we showed up, and so it was like, okay, well, you guys can do it then. So they finally gave us the nod, and they published Carl's novel and my novel. I think they also published Carl's an excerpt maybe from one of his stories in the Slush Pile. He's in there in one of the issues. Slush Pile pretty much has something from everybody, but we weren't one of the ones where every issue
not me
had something from like Jackman or Kostecki or Renquist.
Not me. No, Kostecki thought I was too artsy-fartsy, so I never got in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
we'll get into that when we do your half of the interview for
sure. So between the Amato Opera House and the what was the show? The Medusa show. Was there anything major that went on?
I think they made me Ohio bureau chief. They had like these titles they would give, and
Yeah.
I don't know what exactly that meant, but I had to do something. And so a few years later, I did the Filth Festival, the F Independent Literary Festival for them, just to do something in Ohio where we put on some readings in Ohio with a bunch of ULAers and locals and had some musical acts. And we basically had a festival in Cleveland, which was fun because there aren't too many literary festivals in Cleveland, particularly not that type, that are interesting. Usually something a college does. It's kind of MFA stuff that's kind of boring, I think. And so this was something good. We never redid it just because the locals, I don't know. We had good turnout and everything, but the local writers are, Cleveland has a weird literary scene. They're very insular. And so I was just like, okay, I did my bit. You know, that was about near the end of the ULA. The next year we did the reading tour for the novels to promote it. And then at that point, I think I wanted more time to write. And there was always a lot of infighting, as you know, among the ULA, people fighting over stupid stuff. And I just was tired of it.
But between the Amato Opera House and 2004's Medusa, was there?
Oh, there was the Hamtramck one. That was 2002.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, we did that. And then there were various, there was a slush pile. I think it was in that. I don't know if they had the website. Jeff Potter had started that. And so they were starting to do Monday reports. And I think I started doing a couple of those for them. And then we did the blog a couple of years later. You and I, sort of like an online version of the slush pile of Underground Literary Adventures. I think it was 2004, 2005, somewhere in there. And then 2003, there was a one-off. It wasn't officially ULA. It was a Colin Carter benefit. It was a zine publisher that had gotten, he liked to ride his bike, and he'd gotten hit by a car. And I guess he was injured. And so Carl worked with some other zine publishers to do a benefit for him at some bar in Chicago. And there were some ULAers, and I think Ann Sturzinger had left at that point, but she was there.
She was there,
Carl was there, and I was there. It might have been maybe the first time I met Grover, too, who later joined the UL, Michael Grover. I think he was at that. Either that I met him or at a later reading in Philadelphia, but I think he was there as well. So I met a few of them, and that was not an official ULA event, but there were enough ULA people there. It kind of felt like it was, and so that was fun. And then at that point, a lot of the attacks were coming because Carl was doing his literary corruption campaigns, and so you just like wander in, and the Believer, some McSweeney's people would be saying they didn't understand pen names, apparently. Like, never heard of a nom de plume or a pen name. They said the ULA people changed their names just like Joseph Stalin, communists and terrorists. Literally, and this is like right after 9/11, so like, it's pretty serious calling someone a terrorist in that context, and just kind of jerks, just irresponsible stuff. So
that's a Believer, right?
Yeah, that was the Believer. I think later went out of business. There was some sort of sexual harassment issue or something that it had passed through many hands at that point. It was just kind of the stuff that Carl was saying. When you actually dealt with those people, was kind of creepy. I think another one was like they were pranking him. It was like some rich things. Like it's weird because like people will be like, oh, is it Sedaris? Is that a famous writer, humor writer? Is it David Sedaris? Is that his name? I don't even remember these people's names somewhat.
Yeah,
I think he was very popular at the time, but like he had gotten together with the guy who did Lemony Snicket, and they were like pranking Carl at one point. It's just like, and Carl was like almost destitute. It was just like, yeah, and they were all giving grants to each other. There was like a Jonathan Franzen thing where he was the great hope of American literature. He's a terrible novelist, but he's actually a pretty good essay writer. But they want to shove you down people in American literature's throat as a novelist. And they were promoting him, and he had gotten a grant, and Carl called him out because he didn't need it. He should have gone to someone more deserving. And so there were a lot of activities like that, like petitions. And at that point, it was becoming more online, too. I think we had like a listserv where we discussed these things. And then Carl started his blog, and there'd be all these arguments between like mainstream literati types. That may be where who's the Fight Club guy, Polinick. Years later, he comes out of the blue. I mean, it was that era. So that was very interesting. And I think I did a tour in 2003 for the Perpetual Motion Roadshow. It wasn't a ULA thing. It was just connected with Jim Monroe. He was a Canadian zine publisher, and he did a tour to promote his novel, very sort of DIY tour. And he thought, well, I'm not going to be using this for the next year until my next novel's out. Why don't I just help out a little bit and do a public service and see if some other people want to use this circuit? It was like 7 cities or something. So I did that in 2003. and then kind of promoted the ULA along the way. Also, I think I brought issues of Slush Pile or something with me. I'm not sure. Whatever we had, we brought out, or flyers or something. And we got in like page 6 of the New York Post, like a gossip column, just because I sent the guy a zine and said, and he tied it in with somebody they had actually known. I think it was this well-known writer, the McSweeney's guy, Eggers. He tied it in with Eggers. I guess the page 6 guy hated Eggers or something. So he was like, here's a real writer, like coming, you could see him. And I really was not into the confrontational stuff so much as maybe Carl was, although he was right about literary world being pretty corrupt. I mean, it'd be like you and I giving each other grants or something from the taxpayers, just because we know each other, like that's just kind of crappy. People should be doing something better than that. So there was a lot of stuff like that. And then 2004, we got into the blog. That was probably about the biggest thing I did for the ULA besides the tour and the end of the literary festival. We did that. That was a lot of fun because we got to publish not just ULA writers but other writers, and it just got to be too much work. It was, I was married and had a full-time job. It was just hard to juggle all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, I got backed away from it. I think you left probably soon after, as far as the blog. We just kind of closed it down. No,
we handed it over.
We passed it on to
Pat Simonelli.
Yeah, Pat had come in. There were some new people. Pat, I think, was there. He did it, and he did it for a couple more years, maybe more sporadically than we were doing. We were doing like every week, I think. Have something that was cool, but you needed to maintain that to keep it going. And then that led to the book, and then the tour, and the Independent Literary Festival, and then that was pretty much it. I stayed in touch with them after that, but I think at one point Wencless had quit. And I was like, well, if Wencless isn't here, I'm quitting too. But I was going to leave anyway. So, and then, I think at that point, Frank had kind of running the show. Frank and Steve was still around a little bit. But the amount of infighting sometimes, because you have such forceful personalities together, kind of, wasn't always fun, even though for the most part, there were a lot of fun things.
Yeah. So, yeah, basically trailed off after that. I think just sort of, I don't think there was an official end, but I think
the Howl protest was probably like the last big thing. That was like 2008 or something.
Yeah.
I think Carl came back and then he got involved, and Frank, and you were at that one too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kelly Boy was there at that. He had joined, and so I think that was probably the last big, definitely for media.
That was 2006, believe it or not, and the organization sort of limped along. Maybe not limped along for the first year after that, but till like 2010.
Okay, yeah, I always thought that was later. I don't know why. I have to check the records. But that seemed to be like the last hurrah. I always, like in the Slush Pile anthology, Kostecki had died, and that was always supposed to come out, and it never did. So I helped finish it and put it out just as an ebook. But it seemed like the Great Recession kind of killed it, because the zine publishers and ULA were kind of marginal to begin with, and then everybody's getting unemployed and the economy's collapsed, and that was just like suddenly people had more to worry about than art and literature, unfortunately, and that kind of put the gravestone up for the ULA, even though there was no probably official end. That just was it.
One of the things that I was interested in with Ann Sterzinger's interview was she was talking about sort of new sort of zine equivalents with like Substack and stuff like that. Do you feel like there's any sort of like online zine scene?
I mean, in some ways, it's for going back to like the academic research. One of the things I found out about zines is people publish usually the lowest cost. So whatever. So if it's a photocopier, even if it doesn't look the greatest, do it. Mimeographs before that, whatever the cheapest way of getting it out. Generally, they did. And what's one of the strange things that's happened since then is you have this boutique zine, which has always existed. There were always artist books and artist magazines where they put a little more care into the printing and focused on the materiality. That thread has kind of dominated zines since then. You find Etsy zines where people have a zine for $20, and so it's like, well, that's not really a zine to me. That's because you don't have that cheapest way of putting it out. And so I think a lot of it has gone online. Blogs which still exist, even though they aren't hip anymore. They're still a fine way to get the word out about things. Social networking to some degree, to some extent, you can see everybody has a personal zine with Facebook on their Facebook page, basically, and it's terrifying. I think that was one of the questions we did during I used to ask sometimes when I was doing the thesis with, what if everybody in the world had a zine? Well, there'd be no trees left, one, because everybody'd be chopping down trees, printing out zines. But the other thing is, do we want this? The early days of the internet were very interesting along those lines. There was a lot more trust involved. Generally, if someone was on the net, didn't mean they were necessarily a good person or anything like that, but they were kind of a little maybe smarter than the average bear, shall you say. So I remember doing things like looking for comic books I couldn't find, and you just send off $10 to somebody off a listserv, and they'd mail you back the comic book. No one would do that today. They'd need like a third-party broker like eBay or something before they do that. But that was the early days of the net. And so there was this sense also in the zine scene that everything was you'd be in it, you had to be pretty cool. And then as things got more popular, so like Facebook, for example, everybody has a zine. Suddenly it isn't so cool to have a zine per se, because you get releases a lot of, not that there weren't racist zines or nasty zines before, but suddenly this comes out when everybody's there and they're kind of tapping into the collective unconsciousness in a way. And so it's kind of a terrifying world now that it's a world basically everyone has a zine, even if they're calling it a Facebook page or social networking. I also don't like that those sites, they're there to make money. They spy on people. They censor people. You don't have control over it, and that's probably one of the biggest things with a zine. You always have control over the zine. People could try to stop you, but it was your zine, whereas you could get yanked overnight on the electronic thing. So in some ways, Carl and the Luddites of that era were wise. There is that aspect. However, you can also get your message out to a much wider audience than you ever could in a zine. I mean, something goes viral or millions of people can see it. Unfortunately, that would also be the authorities seeing it, or anyone who does want to repress you. But you can get your word out much more cheaply there. So as far as actual zines, the Substack's interesting. I subscribe to a few Substacks. I'm subscribed to yours and some others. I experimented with it once. I just couldn't keep up with it. Doing a blog, my old blog is enough, so I just pulled the plug. I don't think anybody subscribed anyway, so I was like, okay, well, I also didn't really highly promote it, but okay, well, this is not working for me. But I do think that email kind of newsletter, which is what basically Substack is a good, it's a classic e-zine medium, and that's pretty cool. But old zines, I mean, there's still Joe Smith still doing a zine. It's very cool. It's delightful when it shows up. Mark Sonnenfeld, who has published poetry, underground poetry zines for years. He's still making great zines, and one of those, and it's always nice to hear from him. But there definitely, a lot of them have gone the way. Even blogs, a big list of blogs that I subscribed to over the years, and probably the majority are defunct. They just had this personal need to express themselves, and when the situation changed, they kind of abandoned it. And sometimes they came back years later. Other times they didn't. Also, time marches on. Some people, when we did the ULA anthology, it was there were quite a few dead people. Time on. Even some, they weren't necessarily even old. Something had happened. So that's always happens as well, losing interest. It just served a need for the time, and either it was a need for the individual or the need for a small community, and that need passed. Like Zine World doesn't exist anymore. The people interested in zines moved on with their lives, and maybe some of them write for Xerography Debt now or something, but still do their own zines, but that doesn't exist anymore.
But pretty much the people you mentioned are they've been doing it a long time. Do you think younger folks do you think that's a dead medium for younger folks?
No, the medium always exists. They may not use it. In that sense, it could be dead. And there are younger folks doing zines, but they tend to be the Etsy zine, where it's very nice, but I'm not going to be paying $10 for your zine. I'm sorry. And part of what's going on is inflation. Photocopy prices have gone up. You can't do a zine as cheaply. Businesses monitor their photocopiers more. You can't necessarily, the old punks used to scan their stuff from work all the time. So you can't necessarily do that anymore. Postage is much more expensive. So it's become economically less feasible to do it. So you have the old timers still cranking away, and then you have the new folks doing the fancy material zines that are kind of like an artist project, but not the cheapest way to get your message out anymore. so they're cool to look at. So that's where electronic things have gone on. But with the electronic zine, it's a little bit of a different medium. It serves the need, but it's not quite the same.
Mm-hmm. So what are you working on now?
So after I did the zines, just kind of do the blog regularly, so do some comics and make music, do still fiction write. I usually publish those as novels. Just it's real. That's one nice thing. You can do print on demand much more cheaply now, and you can put out a whole novel as just e-publication very cheaply and code it. And so that's great to have those mediums available. So just working on novels and whatnot.
Cool. Anything I missed that you want to?
No, that's good. You want me to start? Well, we're already 45 minutes in, and we should. Okay, I don't want to make this too long for people. So let's turn to you. You are in Alabama, right? In college at this time, is that right?
I am.
You're eating Barnstormer's pizza and drinking beer there. Is that right? In Montevallo?
Yeah, I was in Birmingham at the time, Birmingham suburbs, but I was just putzing around in the college library and picked up a copy of the Village Voice, and that's when I saw the Start Making Sense.
Oh, the Model Opera House article.
Right. And I was like, that's interesting. Let me, and so that's what I didn't really, I'd been getting zines and stuff, but I hadn't really heard of the ULA before that article. And I might not have heard of it for a while either if I hadn't just picked up that article.
Now, were you reading stuff like Fact Sheet 5 at that point already?
No, it was Zine World.
Zine World. Okay, Zine World. Okay. Yep, that would be, the Zine World would have still been around because I've been in like 2001. Okay. And were you already doing the Cathedral?
No, it's sort of, I was like, wow, you can do lit zines, huh? So that's what it sort of inspired me was reading that article. So then I put together the first issue of Cathedral shortly after that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Were you involved with Babel magazine? I can't remember.
Babel magazine, yes, I was.
Okay, yeah, I remember. So we sort of knew you from Cathedral and zines, and then also I was involved. Like I graduated from college, didn't have access to the old website anymore, so that was Drink Drunk number 4 just closed that open thing. So Babel kind of kept me online during an era I didn't have access to it, and Victor Thorne would publish all sorts of interesting things, and that was before he became very political. So yes, that people were publishing all sorts of crazy. Carl was involved with that too. So
very eclectic, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, that was a trip. And then he got after 9/11 happened. I think he got into Wing TV and it became all political, and that was sort of the end of the literature stuff. But that was some wild literature for sure. The Bukowski Hangover Project and all that stuff.
Yeah, I was involved with that. I got into the online thing before I got into the zine thing. I guess I'm sort of at that age where, I was, 20 in 2000, so it's already transitioning over by that time. So I had my first electronic publication was at Babel, actually.
Okay.
And then my first print was in the Whirligig.
Oh, yes.
If you remember that zine.
Yeah.
So
it later became a kind of a house organ when ULA bought it. So there was the original publisher, Frank, right?
Frank Markopoulos.
Yeah, Frank. And then he sold it or gave it to a ULA-er. And he was the... I don't remember his name right now. He was a nice guy. I met him once, but he took it over. But I think he only did like 1 or 2 more issues.
I think so. There was a sampler available at the Filth Festival.
Yeah. I know you still have copies of it somewhere. I know I have some of Leopold McGuinness's like a sampler for him that I'm still trying to find good homes to. So we printed up a bunch for that event there. Yeah, I wish I remember that guy's name. I think he wasn't in. He didn't want to be in. He kind of had bad feelings about ULA.
Doug Finch.
Doug Finch. Yep, he didn't. So he
I
didn't
had to
want
think about that too.
I kind of forgot about that. Working with the anthology, the ones that were there refreshed my memory, but the ones who said they didn't want interested, some of them I just aren't as called to mind as much. But yeah, he was a nice guy, and he did some interesting stuff, and he wanted to work with the Whirly gig. So then, when you moved actually at some point and got really involved with ULA, did you move in with Frank and Carl?
I moved in with Frank. Yeah.
Okay.
That was something. That was 2006. That's why I remember the Howl reading so clearly. It was because I moved in March 2006,
okay, so
or maybe late February 2006, and then the Howl reading was March 2006.
So you came 2005. There was a reading in Philadelphia, right? You were at that one. I remember. It might have been the first time we met in person. Is that right?
We met at the Cullen Carter.
Oh, Cullen Carter, 2003. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So then the Philly in 2005. We were doing the blog at that point, Underground Literary Adventures. So we were doing that like 2004, 2005, and then you were filming stuff. You were working on movies even before that, right?
Yeah. I was working on movies. Yeah.
Yeah.
I made a film of the Medusa show.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah. So
you were working with something with Bill Blackall too.
I did. That's lost now, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Unless you have a copy.
I do not. I wish that. I'd like to see that. He's an interesting fellow.
Yeah, I would too.
Really worried about him when you were doing this project if he'd still be around, but I was quite happy to see if he was. We have to interview him first because he's pretty old.
He's in better shape than I am.
Yeah, we found that out. Good, impressive guy.
I imagine he's still doing his morning workouts every morning. So I stayed over with him when I was doing the film, and I would wake up to this ruckus, and it was him doing his morning workouts. He didn't use dumbbells or anything. He just used stuff that was around the house, and
wow,
yeah,
you lift my bed up.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
And then he had about 6 or 7 eggs with jalapenos, fresh jalapenos.
Wow,
from the garden. So
he still has dogs too. He was telling me about the dogs during the interview. So he always had pit bulls, and he always loved raising them. So he seems pretty much the same.
Yeah, he's character.
Yes, for sure. That was fun thing about ULA was all these. What did you think of all these eccentric characters that you were encountering when you go to the Colin Carter benefit, or online, or the Philadelphia reading?
Oh, I loved it. The weirder, the better. That's why I liked it in Philly when that was when Jelly Boy and his brother were part of it, and that was really exciting, to get the whole carnival, like literally the carnival.
They were show performers, literally. That's how they made a living. Perform at Coney Island and travel around. They had a band. Yeah, they were interesting.
Yeah, still do.
Yeah, it's very cool. They're still out there, and of course they added quite a dimension to your typical literary reading, swallowing a sword or blowing fire or whatever stuff they were going to do.
Right. Yeah, they did that. Jelly Boy did that at yours, I believe. He had just learned how to swallow a sword, so that was one of his first sword swallowing performances. Was at the Phil Festival.
And the Howl protest, I think, probably the highlight of the entire night was probably him doing the mousetrap on his tongue to protest the silencing of underground writers.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if he did that on stage or not.
I think he did. They or in the audience, because then he and Carl went inside. I think as the story goes, and that somebody called him out. Well, if you're so good, come on up here, and he did that protest. So.
Yeah, I should remember because I was in the audience too. We had all gotten tickets, and Frank and I had gone in, and we got kicked immediately out because we were just like we were laughing during the reading, so
Yeah.
we got immediately ejected. So, but I was there. I believe he did do the mousetrap thing on his tongue on stage. He tried to get one of the readers to do it for him,
I wouldn't do it either. I don't blame that reader.
but he said no. I'd probably rather get on with his reading, but that was fun.
So you were actually in Philly. Now you leave the ULA at some point and form another organization. Is that while you're still in Philly, or had you moved somewhere to Maryland or somewhere at that point? Or?
I moved to Maryland.
Okay, yeah, that's the outsider writers who sort of a lot of old ULAers were in them. Leopold had gone. I think it was more like just promote underground literature. Don't attack the mainstream as much. We want the folks to be on underground literature, and that went on for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
What had led to that?
I think we all were sort of wanting to distance ourselves from Carl at the time. That was with the whole when he was doing the whole CIA stuff. What was it?
Oh, right. Yeah, it come out that like Plimpton, the Paris Review, Plimpton had come to the editor in chief of the Paris Review, had come to a press conference for the ULA, I think the Amato Opera House reading. So he had come to it, and they had some sort of somewhat playful confrontation, I guess. And then years later, it came out that it was a front for the CIA. It was quite common during their time. They were trying to get the intellectuals in Europe away from communism and attract them into formal techniques, and the Paris Review was one of them. And there was a very controversy about whether Plimpton knew, or I think Matheson knew, but it seems beyond belief that Plimpton wouldn't have any idea where this money was coming from.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what sort of, I mean, he ended up, I mean, he was right, but I don't know, I guess at the time we sort of wanted to not be so loud, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's always that tension in the ULA between promoting the literature and then like kind of critiquing the mainstream, which did publish a lot of crap. And sometimes it seemed like the focus was more on critiquing the mainstream than promoting the underground. I felt that pressure as well, for sure. That's one of the reasons I left. I wanted to do more writing, not necessarily more political protests.
I kind of wish I had hung on a little bit. Maybe, I could have started another publication or something like that and just concentrated. But because, like I said, it turned out Carl was right. But at the time, it just seemed like a lot of ranting,
Right.
And, so anyway, that's what happened. We're talking about the ULA today, though, not the outsider writers. So we'll see which one lasted.
I mean, they both had similar missions for sure, and so it's like any movement, strong personalities are going to form other things. I don't know if there were any other groups that came out of the ULA per se. It just kind of dispersed itself at the end. Now, did you ever get back involved with the ULA like later on towards the end, or I never really did. I mean, I stayed in touch with them, but I don't think I ever really got active with anything. Maybe I signed a petition or something at some point.
Years later, there was an attempt to do a ULA 2, and I was involved with that a little bit, but that fizzled out.
I never even got invited to that. You must be special.
I can't remember how I got involved with that. It was all taking place through Carl's blog. The one that he had, the secret blog, that you had to have an invite to.
I remember that one. I've been on it. I don't remember. Talking to Demi Puppets. It was the main blog, and then it's various other ones over the years. We had a number of blogs. We had our literary adventure blog. There was a book review blog, Carl's, and then individual members had blogs. I think that's where my blog came from. Was I needed a comment or something on Carl's blog for some reason, and I didn't have a blogger account, and so I had to sign up for one. And then once I had it, I was like, all right, I'll use it. And I put some poetry up there. I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. I'll do this again. And eventually I had like a regular website, and then the blog. I was like, why am I paying fees for a website host? I'll just have, Google pay the bills. And there's dangers to that. Of course, they can always shut you down. But like, hey, that sounds good. And so the blogging was kind of fun. But yeah, there were a lot of blogging comments, and that's how we did the How did you come up with the idea for Underground Literary Adventures blog? Or how did we? I don't remember the origins.
I have no idea.
Yeah, it just seemed like a cool idea.
It just seemed like something that we needed to do. Just get, we were doing the Monday reports and stuff, so I thought that a literary equivalent would be, a creative equivalent would be a nice thing to have.
It's still up after all these. I mean, I don't know how much longer they're going to keep it up. I don't remember. Google's suddenly now kind of shutting things down.
Yeah, as long as Google decides to keep their old blogs up, it'll stay up, and then it'll be on the Internet Archive.
So. As well. I think I downloaded it maybe at some point too, either when I was doing the book or even when we were doing it. You could save the whole blog. It's always messy, but you can save the whole blog and kind of reconstruct it if you have to. You can't save the pictures, but you get all the word, the text. So yeah, that was. I think that was one of the best things ULA did was that blog. Because every week it was something fun to read. I think I did it one week, and you do it the next, and we just kind of went back and forth like that. And then after a while, it was a lot of work, so I think that's why I passed it on to Pat.
I think that's because we did a month at a time, so we had to get a bunch of stuff lined up, and then it was difficult after a while. But I think I remember now that it did start very briefly as like a updates sort of blog, like this is a reading here and this, and it sort of evolved into the Underground Literary Adventures for some reason.
Yeah, that was cool. That's great that some of that stuff is still there. People can go back and read that. The Slush Pile Anthology, anybody can download that and read it or print it out at the library or wherever. It'd be nice to get a print version of it someday, but there's just so many people. I didn't want to mess with royalties because somebody will be complaining about their 17 cents. They want it. All right. Too bad Microcosm or somebody can't deal with it. Go deal with it. I don't want to deal with that. The ebook anybody can download and send out for free. So it's nice that there was these alternative things that are there that show there's a little more to American literature or world literature than what is in the history books per se, the officially written history books. Because
I guess I'm the only one with a print version, probably.
You got a print? Okay.
I sent it off to get printed and bound. Cost $15 or something like that.
That probably would be the price if it came out. And that's probably the going rate. So that's great. Yeah, I don't even have one.
I was like, I can't read all this on a tablet or whatever. So I had it printed out and read it that way. That's how I read all my long form stuff.
Yeah.
Still, I can't. I don't know.
That may be the only copy of it that survives in 100 years.
Maybe.